This is a 13 Weather Impact Alert.
Well, hello everyone on this Tuesday evening, 9 o'clock on the nose, Colton.
Oh yeah, starting
yeah.
right at 9.
Yeah, I'm meteorologist Blake Hansen. Joining me is meteorologist Colton Woods, and of course our big focus of weather comes in the way of a wintry mix tomorrow evening into the early hours of Thursday. Colton, what's funny is that last week at this time, we kind of had this on the horizon eventually, at least the opportunity of a wintry mix, and almost a week later, it's still in our forecast.
Oh yeah. Thankfully though, it doesn't look to be too bad.
Yeah, you know, that's the biggest thing as we say hello to everyone joining us over these next few minutes, whether it's on Facebook, YouTube, whatever social media app exists these days. We say hi to you again on this Tuesday evening. The good news, as you mentioned, Colton, is that while we have some ice in the forecast, and any ice can be problematic, we are not looking at a major ice storm by any means. And I think everyone can take a big exhale, a big deep breath there, because anytime we talk about ice, you get a little more nervous compared to some more impactful snow. But, you know, in the way of weather this week, as we join people in here, we got a couple things to break down. And our first one is right here. This is our focus of the forecast. And it really comes 24 hours from now. Tomorrow, late in the evening through the early hours of Thursday, our biggest impact comes in the way of freezing rain. And that is the icing event we've been advertising a few days now. Any ice, again, causes some issues. And the good news, silver lining, is that we are only expecting ice to get to a point where it will cause travel impacts. And while travel impacts are still important, we are not looking at any major disruptions to power per se, or anything that should be a multi-day event. It should be mostly confined to what you see on the screen here, Wednesday night through Thursday morning in the way of freezing rain and icy roads. So obviously a little extra time and distance for travel. One thing before we get into it, I know, again, we just started a couple minutes ago. Today was the last day, at least if you're watching from the Grand Rapids area, where the sun set, Colton, before 6 in the evening. Yeah, that's a step in the right direction.
Spring is coming.
We're on the back end of winter. Hard to believe. It is now February. By the end of the month, we're going to see that sunset time get to near 6:30. And by the second week of March, I believe it's that second weekend of March, that's when we have daylight saving time kickoff. And that sunset time will jump all the way past 7:30 in the evening. So
can't wait for that.
yes. Whether you like winter or not, I think we all can agree we like some longer daylight.
Exactly.
Let's get into the big setup here around the Great Lakes. And you can see not a lot going on, Colton. Pretty quiet day, a little cooler. We had some lake effect snow, very light lake effect snow in the typical snow belts of northern lower Michigan. That's up in the Mansalona, Gaylord area. Also into the eastern half of the UP, Munising, for example, up towards Whitefish Point and towards Sault Ste. Marie, a little bit of lake effect, and then also the case off of Lake Huron, even parts of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Lake Erie is almost frozen.
Yeah, I was going to
so
say that's
not a lot
surprising.
of not a lot of lake effect. We did not see much lake effect here in West Michigan, just a few flurries at best. So if, for the most part, we have a pretty quiet night ahead of us, and much of tomorrow will be quiet as well. I think that's a big thing I want to make a focal point about, is that if you got, tomorrow you got morning plans, you got afternoon plans, even evening plans, all the way to like 8 o'clock or so. A fairly quiet day expected under a mostly cloudy sky. So we're going to kick it off. Here's our hour-by-hour forecast. And again, this is 1 o'clock. It's still dry. Might even have some filtered sunshine around.
Yeah. Not a bad day, honestly.
Yeah, not bad at all. Temperatures tomorrow will be in the upper 20s to near 30 degrees. So pretty close to average at this point of February, maybe just a degree or two cooler than average. But here it is. Here's 6 o'clock in the evening, so right around sunset tomorrow. Still very dry. Let's just advance this very slowly here. Here's 7, maybe a few flurries trying to develop, a little bit of light snow northward. Here's 8, 9, 10 o'clock, and we are still fairly dry in more spots across West Michigan. It's looking like it'll take about that 11 o'clock midnight time frame for that wintry mix to be on our doorstep. And this will mostly impact those first near South Haven, Kalamazoo, back down to the Michigan state line. And so again, this is not until 11 o'clock in the evening to midnight. And I think the biggest thing, Colton, we've been together all day now, looking all over the model data and stuff, and we've kind of seen this trend over the last 24 hours. Notice that the bulk of any freezing rain that's shaded in pink, that wintry mix, will be mostly south of I-96.
For sure.
That's been the trend for days now and is still continuing to be the trend. North of 96, north of, let's say, Muskegon, Rockford, Ionia line. This is going to be mostly just a light snow event.
And not a lot of snow.
And not a lot of snow either, yeah. No.
Less than an inch probably.
So, again, and this is the thing, is that if you're watching northward, it's just going to be light snow. At this point of winter, not a huge deal. It's really, we're focusing on the areas that are have the pink coloring around them. So south of Holland, Grand Rapids line to the south. So basically I-196, I-96 to the south. But here's the one trend that we have seen over the last couple hours. Notice that the precipitation kind of looks disorganized, because it will be. It's going to be generally light in nature. And look how quickly this is out of here. Remember, we said this precipitation was going to come in around 11 o'clock, midnight. This is 6 a.m., and it's nearly out of here.
Wow.
And by the time we get to noon tomorrow, outside of maybe a little bit of light snow to the north, there's no more icing to talk about. So, of course, we're not talking a long-lasting ice event by any means. And this is what we're thinking at the end of the day. So north of 96, everything shaded in blue, you might see up to an inch of snow. Not a big deal. Not a big
We're
deal.
in February. That's nothing.
This might have been a big deal if it was the first week in November.
Yeah,
not in February. Yeah, if this was the first flakes of the year, maybe. It's really all about I-96 to the south, where we introduced that freezing rain opportunity. And I think the other thing, and you're going to show this in just a second, Colton, is that the biggest trend that has been prominent from a forecasting perspective is that we are seeing less in the way of ice accumulation.
For sure.
Or ice accretion, as we like to put it. How much can accrete on the sidewalks, the tree branches, power lines, for example? How much can actually accumulate? And I think more spots than not, all of this shaded in light pink. So we're talking Holland, we're talking even Allegan, Hastings, the south side of Grand Rapids towards Wyoming, into Byron Center, southern Ionia County. I think this is going to trend more towards just a glaze of ice, a few hundredths of an inch at best. Still cause some icy roads, some slippery spots, especially on the back roads, but not screaming a major ice event. If there's an area that could see a little bit more ice, and that still remains for those that are near and south of I-94, I should say. So we're talking south of that, Paw Paw, Kalamazoo to Battle Creek line, down to the state line. That's where there's still the opportunity. I think we could pick up a 1/10 of an inch of ice, maybe even a little bit more than that if we overachieve somewhat. But again, the biggest trend here has been less in the way of ice, especially for the bulk of us in West Michigan, maybe a few hundredths of an inch, and that should negate any major impacts, because we know that ice can become a pretty big issue.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's the good news out of this silver lining. You have a lot of actual model data to look at. Let's send this over to Max 2, and you can see that you're looking at model data. So what are we looking at here?
So this is the European model. By far, Blake, this model has been the most aggressive out of all of the models that we have. We look at several different weather models. This is the European model, which is usually a pretty good model, I would say, probably the most accurate. But this one, it's kind of overdoing the ice, at least it has been so far this past week. But in general, it still paints the same picture. Less ice to the north, especially north of I-96. Once you get south of I-96, that's where we start to see maybe upwards of a 1/10, maybe 15/100ths of an inch of ice. And then really the heaviest ice likely staying south of the state line. So if you do have travel plans to northern Indiana or northern Ohio, let's say, you might run into some more higher impacts, at least in those regions, especially going into Thursday morning. But here in West Michigan, we're really not expecting too much in the way of ice, especially around Grand Rapids to Muskegon, and even to the north of there. Might not even see any ice at all toward Ludington and Big Rapids, where it'll mostly just be snow.
And you were saying is that we do love the European model. It does very well most times. But this does seem to be the exception for this typical setup. And we can go in so much further detail about this, but I think the bigger focus here is that we also have other models to look at, other pieces of guidance to look at. And you can see here, the GFS model here is not really indicating a lot of ice, maybe, upwards of that 1/10 of an inch of ice south of I-94. So still in that ballpark, but definitely not screaming the bigger impacts that the European model had.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't even have ice north of Grand Rapids, period. So
yeah, it keeps the ice pretty concentrated south of 96. And that's why we're aligning that in our forecast that, you get north of that Muskegon Grand Rapids line, it's mostly just going to be light snow.
Exactly. And even looking at a different model, this is a more high-resolution, short-term model. We call this the North American model, and you can see same picture, mostly the highest amounts. This has less ice, but you can see just more ice further to the south near I-94, Kalamazoo, Three Rivers.
And even this, if this would come to fruition, this would be
nothing.
This would be nothing, basically, no matter where you're at.
Yeah.
You would really have to go south of the state line to see any ice, and so there's a lot of other guidance that we look at. That we don't have access to here on our actual weather graphics system, but are painting a similar picture to where any, I guess you would call it, impactful ice accumulation is going to be confined to roughly I-94 and to the south, and that kind of correlates back to our forecast. As we let's get it back to Max 1 real quick, and you can see, yeah, there it is. This is where we're kind of thinking might be the sweet spot for some of the better ice, the longer lasting freezing rain that could accumulate upwards, maybe even a little bit more than 1/10 of an inch. So, it's one of those situations, Colton, that, when we talk about ice, any ice can cause issues, but we're really staying away from, I think, the messaging now that this is going to be a whole hands-on deck type of system.
Exactly, for sure. And if we want to switch it over to Max 2, this is about what the impacts that you can see with possibly upwards of 1/10 of an inch of ice, generally a light glaze. Yeah,
this seems very, this is a good guide of what we usually expect.
Yeah.
We're kind of in that glaze to 1/10 of an inch of ice. Ice is possible, to be on the trees and some power lines.
Yeah.
I think it's the second and third line that really is the most important, is that.
Especially. Yeah,
there'll be slick spots, sidewalks, parking lots. They're going to be slippery, especially if they're not salted.
So if you're walking outside, especially closer to I-94, you might slip if you're not careful, because even just a glaze of ice can definitely make sidewalks or even steps or your back deck could definitely start to get a little slick when we get a light glaze.
I want to look at temperatures real quick, and that's a good graphic that we're going to get into in just a second. But this is a quick look at our temperature profile through Wednesday night. Just notice that we stay below freezing. So there's a lot of different aspects of why we see different precipitation types, snow versus sleet versus freezing rain. There's a bit of a different setup when we look at our atmosphere, but regardless is that when we're really looking for those sweet spots near I-94, notice that the temperature still remains at or below the freezing mark through daybreak on Thursday. So that's why even as this event comes to an end pretty quickly Thursday morning, I still think we're going to have some icy spots that remain in those morning hours Thursday for the Thursday morning commute. But notice by 11, let's get this to about noon, and those numbers are starting to creep up into the middle 30s, especially in those spots that have the better opportunity for some better icing. But I don't think the impact stopped there, Colton, and it's not because of additional ice. I think everyone's going to see, or you're not going to see, you're going to feel it outside. The wind is going to ramp up Thursday. Now, the good news here is that a lot of the ice, the impacts from any of the freezing rain, especially towards I-94, should be melting away as this wind picks up. But look what happens Wednesday. As we get into the afternoon, we saw this last week. I think it was last week, where we had those two very windy days back to back. And we're going to have a similar day of this on Thursday where, we get into that 40, maybe even 45 mile per hour range in terms of the gust, especially closer to the lakeshore. Our latest trend here is that we've been seeing some wind gusts modeled, maybe even approaching 50 miles per hour later Wednesday, especially in the early evening hours through a chunk of Thursday night before it'll finally start to relax as we get into Friday morning. So definitely that is going to be our next focus beyond this wintry mix, is that good 12-hour stretch where the wind will be quite gusty once again.
And another thing is Thursday afternoon actually could see a lot of sunshine, and the sunshine actually helps to make it windier because the turbulence, the atmosphere starts to mix up a little bit more.
Yep,
becomes more turbulent.
Yep, you got that completely right. Yep, we start to mix down with some sunshine, and yeah, that will really add on to the wind. But you know, that's kind of the focus there. And then we don't stop it there either. It's a very active stretch that we're going to be heading into. I think much of February is going to be active here in West Michigan, the Great Lakes in general. It's not going to be Friday. Friday's a nice quiet day. The wind relaxes. Yeah, nice end to the week.
Maybe a little bit of sun.
We got a more potent system coming out of the Pacific, out of the west, a storm system. And this one, I really do feel has better ingredients to it. Not necessarily in terms of just of a wintry mix. I think in terms of a decent snowstorm.
Yeah.
Finally, for once, we have something this system or this season that doesn't revolve around lake effect snow. This is appearing to be a true system snow as we get into Saturday. Now, I want to pump the brakes a little bit here. We are still 4 or 5 days out.
Exactly.
Today's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're 4 days out. We're starting to really get a feel that there is going to be a system nearby progressing through the Great Lakes region. And again, this is system snow. So notice as we get through Saturday, and this is just one specific run, so we don't need to get too crazy here. But the point of this is that we're not just talking localized lake effect snow bands where a matter of miles makes the difference. We're looking at possibly a storm system that could impact a good majority of the Great Lakes region and possibly the entirety of us here in West Michigan. You know, a solid swath of snow, maybe a little bit of ice mixing in towards the state line. Again, this would be mostly confined to around Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening, and then it would be out of here in a hurry on Sunday. And I know we're just showing one particular model here, but there's a lot of support from some of the longer range models we look at that show a very similar look. So that's why our confidence is there to show this already.
Exactly.
4 days out. You know, in terms of snowfall, Saturday, if this would come to fruition, we could be looking at an easy 4 to 8 inches of snow. It could
especially north of I-96.
Yeah.
The confidence is a little bit higher up there.
Yeah, I would say so too. We're north of 96 towards US 10. And if you have, you know, friends, family, travel plans up into northern lower Michigan, the confidence is a little higher as of now there. But again, 4 days out, we could easily see, you know, a 50-mile shift, and we could be in the bullseye completely. So, you know, there's definitely the better opportunity for some solid snow on Saturday. And then Sunday looks pretty quiet for now, which is good news for Super Bowl plans. You know, maybe people have Super Bowl plans, parties going on. Sunday would be a quiet day. So we got the wintry mix tomorrow night and early Thursday, a pretty windy end to Thursday, and then a potential storm system coming in on Saturday. And we're not going to show anything more longer than that, but there are signs that next week could be very active as well across the country, including us here in the Great Lakes. So
it's very typical with a La Nina type pattern because in the Pacific Ocean, the water at the equator is now cooler than average, which means it is La Nina. And when we get into a La Nina, at least a week one here in winter, across the Great Lakes, it starts to turn a little bit more active. So we've had lake effect snow so much this winter, but it looks like things are now turning to more system snow.
Any comments here? Anything? Anyone asking anything good as of now?
Not really.
Just saying hi?
Yeah.
That's all good. 9:20 here on a Tuesday. Let's get to Max 2 because we always get this question now as we're starting to really get, we're in the second half of winter by far now. We are past the halfway point for our average in terms of snow. What's interesting here is that it feels like this has been a pretty decent winter overall. Well, coming off of last winter, you really can't. You can't get much worse than last winter. If you love snow and cold, last winter was the worst you could ask for.
For sure.
If you don't like winter, last winter was the best you could ask for. It's all about perspective. Observed snowfall. Grand Rapids has seen just a touch over 54 inches of snowfall. On average, we should be around 53.5 inches of snowfall at this point of the season through the 4th of February. That puts us only about a half inch above average.
Pretty average winter.
pretty average winter so far in terms of snowfall. Muskegon actually in a deficit for snowfall now. 58 and 3/10 of an inch of snow is what we've seen so far at Roosevelt Park, and average is about 3 inches more than that at 61. So we're in a 3-inch deficit. Now we'll see what happens over the next week or two.
Saturday,
and maybe Saturday we catch right back up. But you know, it's just all about perspective coming off of a very lackluster winter, one of the warmest on record and the least snowiest on record here in West Michigan, at least.
I think we even hit 72 one day last February.
Yep, we did. Towards the end of February last year was our warmest February day in West Michigan history, recorded history, where we hit 70 degrees. But what's funny is that from a snowfall perspective, we've been pretty average, and from a temperature perspective, we've been fairly average as well. December was a slightly above average month temperature-wise. In January, despite the polar vortex coming in, we ended the month actually kind of mild, and that it still ended the month of January below average, but it wasn't
nothing crazy.
Nothing significant by any means.
2 degrees cooler or something.
So generally, we have been around average for this meteorological winter, and the season snowfall as well has been quite average too. So we'll see how February shapes out. It does appear that we're going to have a pretty active storm track over the next week, maybe even 2 weeks. And we'll just see how it goes. But, you know, I think the bigger takeaway here, you know, for those wondering again, let's just get into the first system that's coming here. And this is tomorrow evening through the daybreak hours of Thursday. Many of us will avoid big-time impacts. Not saying Thursday morning won't be a little slick out there, maybe even a little dicier towards I-94. But it should, if the trend holds, thinking we're avoiding anything big time in terms of ice, which I am perfectly okay with.
No ice storm. I don't want that.
You know, I will take a foot of snow any day.
Oh yeah.
Compared to a major ice storm. That is the case. It's easy.
Power outages are not fun.
Yeah. No. We don't like to see that. So good thing is that, you know, again, you know, before we you know, kind of get out of here in the next few minutes, Colton, you know, north of 96 here in blue, you might see up to 1 inch of light snow by daybreak Thursday. That is not a big deal for many of you.
Nope.
Maybe just a few slippery spots on the back roads. Really from just on the south side of Muskegon through Grand Rapids, parts of Ionia, towards the south into Berry, Allegan County, a glaze to 1/10 of an inch of ice, but I really think most of you probably will trend towards the lower end of that range, towards maybe just a few hundredths of an inch, that glaze of ice, and then again towards I-94 from South Haven, Pawpaw, Kalamazoo, Battle Creek. That's the potential for maybe upwards of that 1/10 of an inch of ice, maybe a little bit more if we can overachieve, and where we could see some prolonged travel impacts Thursday morning before we warm up a little bit above average. So again, that's the good news, is that while we have some impacts, it's nothing that's screaming big time ice storm.
Thankfully.
Yeah. And otherwise, that's kind of what we got here. And, you know, unless we have some questions that you see on here, we just want to give a quick update.
Susan says, need to drive from Kalamazoo to Lansing on Thursday morning. What ice will Lansing have?
Lansing, a good question. It's going to fall into that same category. Let's go back to Max 1 here. I know it's kind of out of our area, our forecast area per se, but it would fall right in here. That glaze to 1/10 of an inch of ice for the most part. You know, definitely would give yourself extra time. You know, wake up in the morning, you know, go on MDOT's travel map. They do a great job of, you know, showing what the average speeds are, what accidents there are. You know, just give yourself a good idea of how the roads are kind of trending in the morning. And we'll do our best here, you know, at 13 on your side of how travel, you know, or how traffic's doing Thursday morning with Dave Cackley. But between Kalamazoo and Lansing, yeah, probably a bit of a slower drive, I would say.
Not a perfect drive.
But do I think it's impossible per se? No, I don't think it would be impossible unless we really overachieve. And at that point, you wouldn't even want to risk it. But again, I think at this point of the forecast, a little slower, extra time, extra distance, as I like to always say this time of year. I feel like a broken record, but should be okay for the most part, especially if you don't have to travel until later in the morning as those temperatures start to warm up. Road crews have been attacking most of the morning by then with some salt on the roads. should be manageable.
Plus,
overall.
when that sun eventually comes out in the afternoon too, just the sun itself will help to melt some of the ice too.
If you're planning on driving back from Lansing to Kalamazoo later in the day, things should be good outside of the wind picking up in the later afternoon and evening. That's kind of what we got here. We just wanted to give a quick update. I know there's been a lot of talk. There's so many different ways you can get weather information these days, and just kind of wanted to share our latest thoughts here at 13 on Your Side about how the impacts that we have ahead of us. But the good news, again, not a major ice storm, but will turn windy later Thursday.
Yes.
And we'll be keeping an eye on Saturday. So winter's not done just yet. The groundhog did say 6 more weeks of winter cold. So
I don't think he's lying.
Punxsutawney Phil wasn't lying maybe this year. So we'll see how it goes. But of course, you can find our latest forecast on 13onyourside.com. You can download 13 Plus on Roku, Fire TV. Anything that you need to know is on there as well. And again, we'll have the latest all be on air at 11 o'clock here on our normal programming. So with that, we'll let you be. If you have any other questions, try to type them in. We'll do our best to go back to this live stream and answer them and go from there. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. We'll see you later.
This has been a 13 Weather Impact Alert.